Good morning.
How long are we going?
We're going about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. That work? Wonderful.
Okay.
Good morning.
Gotta give me 2 seconds then.
Oh, that's okay. We've already started, guys, but that's fine.
Oh, all right.
All right. Good morning. My name, as you can see, we are friends and we're just kind of hanging out here. So we're chatting with you. My name's Garland Nixon and welcome to my channel. Today, we're going to have an exciting and informative conversation with two of the most knowledgeable and experienced intellectuals in the field of military intelligence and international relations, Scott Ritter and Ray Mcgovern. Let's talk. Good morning and welcome to my channel on YouTube and on Rockfin. Ray Mcgovern, he served as a CIA analyst for 27 years, from the administration of John F. Kennedy to that of George H.W. Bush. Ray's duties including chairing national intelligence estimates and preparing the president's daily brief, which he briefed one-on-one to President Ronald Reagan's 5 most senior national security advisors. Ray co-created in 2003 Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity to expose how intelligence was being used to falsely to justify the war in Iraq. Ray has a BA and an MA degrees from both from Fordham University. They're in Russian history, language, and literature with minors in theology, philosophy, and classics. He holds a certificate in theological studies from Georgetown University and is a graduate of Harvard Business School's Advanced Management Program. Scott Ritter is a former U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer and author of Scorpion King, America's Suicidal Embrace of Nuclear Weapons from FDR to Trump. He served in the Soviet Union as an inspector implementing the INF Treaty, served in General Schwarzkopf's staff during the Gulf War, and from 1991 and 1998 served as a chief weapons inspector with the UN in Iraq. Mr. Ritter currently writes on issues pertaining to international security, military affairs, Russia, and the Middle East, as well as arms control and non-proliferation. Guys, welcome.
Morning.
Well, let's start here. There's a lot of things that we want to get started on, and I'm going to start by asking you guys 2 different questions. We're going to start with you based on your expertise, and then we'll get into some things that we can all talk about. Scott, give us an update. What is the status of the special military operation in Ukraine as you see it?
Special military operation is unfolding as Russia has envisioned. They are in the process of liberating, capturing, occupying, whatever term you want to use, the Donbass. They have successfully linked the Donbass with Crimea with a land bridge. They're in the process of destroying the bulk of the Ukrainian army. And I think Russia is finding itself in a position it probably didn't anticipate when they started the special military operation. That is, things have developed in terms of NATO's and the United States level of support to Ukraine. We see the Ukrainian military reconstituting a significant combat capability, both outside of Ukrainian territory. We know that right now there's Ukrainian military formations undergoing advanced training in the use of Western artillery pieces in Poland and in Germany. Similar training is taking place regarding armored vehicles, tanks that are being provided. And what this means is that even though Russia is in the process of destroying a significant force, 40 to 60,000 Ukrainian troops in eastern Ukraine, Ukraine is reconstituting a combat capability that, if not addressed, will create the potential for a lengthened conflict. We've seen that the Ukrainians have the ability to carry out combined arms operations as we speak. We see successful counterattacks in the Kharkiv region. We see Ukraine attempting counterattacks in the south toward Kherson. So the idea that the Ukrainian military has been completely eliminated as an effective fighting force, I think, is a flawed concept. They are suffering significant losses, but unless Russia broadens its special military operation, and probably to the point of changing it from a special military operation to a war that includes the totality of the Ukrainian battle space. This is a conflict that is becoming dangerously close to being unwinnable by Russia, meaning that while they can achieve their special military operation objectives in the eastern Ukraine with 200,000 troops, they're not able to prevent Ukraine from rearming and re-equipping when Ukraine is being provided with tens of billions of dollars worth of equipment by NATO. Ukraine, look, we saw this in Vietnam. We saw this in Iraq. We saw this anywhere when in the Russians saw in Afghanistan. Anytime you provide your opponent safe space to build up military capability, you're never going to win. The North Vietnamese had the Ho Chi Minh Trail, Laos, Cambodia. In Afghanistan, the Russians saw that the Afghan rebels had Pakistan. In Iraq, the rebels, the Shia rebels, were able to use Iran as an area for refitting, re-equipping, retraining, etc. And so long as Russia allows NATO and Ukraine virtual hands-free access to Western Ukraine for training and for places in Poland, Germany, and elsewhere to equip without fear of Russian attack. This is a conflict that Russia is going to have a very difficult time controlling. They're winning in the East. That's what they said their objective was all along. They're accomplishing that objective. That's a special military operation. But we're talking war right now. I don't think Russia's made that transition yet. This is a de facto proxy war between the West and Russia, using NATO or using Ukrainian forces as the sword for NATO. The goal of this is to bleed Russia dry. And if Russia doesn't change the dynamic, then the reality is Russia will be bled dry. This is a conflict that is extremely bloody. Zelensky's indicated he's willing to mobilize 1 million people. And if it's one thing to say I'm going to mobilize 1 million people. It's another thing to say I'm going to mobilize 1 million people at the time when the West is ready to provide you with the funding that makes us capable and the equipment that turns 1 million people into a real military threat. So I see what's been happening in the last couple of weeks as being very decisive. This military aid that the West is providing is changing the dynamic. And if Russia doesn't find a way to address this meaningfully, to eliminate it as a military capability, then so long as Russia seeks a limited objective operation, that's all they're going to get. But the conflict will never end. Ukraine, I don't see Ukraine surrendering anytime soon.
We've got an interesting article that came out today that's going to address that issue, and we're going to talk about that next. The two of all of us. But first, Ray Mcgovern, I had something I wanted to touch on specifically with you, and that is regarding a conversation that between Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin in December. And some things that happened afterwards. If you could clarify your understanding of that and how that created the dynamics to get us where we are today.
Yeah, Garland, it seems to me very important. Now, I'm an old criminologist, right? And I used to read the press black and white, okay? And you can glean all kinds of things from reading the Russian press. This has been missed, perhaps deliberately, in the US and the Western press. And that is simply this. In very late December of last year, Putin made it clear that he needed to talk to the president of the United States like right away, like now. Negotiations between Russia and the United States were to start in just 12 days. But Biden sensibly said, all right, let's talk. And they talked on the telephone on December 30, 2021. What happened? There was no real readout from the American side, but the Russian side said two things. Number one, that Biden had promised to take personal charge of what was going on with respect to negotiations and making sure that they were done accurately and with a modicum of trust. Okay. The second thing, more important, was according to the Kremlin readout now, Biden promised not to put offensive strike weapons in Ukraine. Okay. The wherewithal for them are already well established in Romania. All it takes is a little disk to change them from so-called ABM sites to cruise missile or even faster missile sites. In Poland, they're almost there. So here's Biden making a very strong pledge saying, all right, we talk about Poland and Romania later, but be reassured, Vladimir, be reassured. We are not, as he put it, we have no intention of putting offensive strike missiles in Ukraine. Big deal. Did the U.S. Contend with, or did they criticize, or did they paw, or did they say, well, that's not right? No, they didn't. They just let it stand. What happened? Well, 12 days later, the negotiations began. It looks very much like the U.S. side forgot about the promise, or that they told Biden the following morning, Joe, God's sake, this is our ace in the hole, man. We can put strike weapons in there. Don't forget about what you promised Putin that you'd do. Now, this is all based on what we used to call media analysis. It was a very lucrative practice. You had to know how to do it, and basically you had to do the work. When Bill Casey came in as Ronald Reagan's head of the CIA, he was astonished. He said, most of my military people, most of my political people on the Soviet Union at the time, just read this stuff, and 80%, his word, 80% of the conclusions is based on open sources. This is terrible. We need spies. Well, come on. That's always been the case. It's been a kind of a neglected area, shall we say, lately. And I put out an appeal to my colleagues. Am I wrong in thinking this means something? Was there a promise? And was it the case that the U.S. didn't dispute that? That much is clear. Well, what kind of reaction would you expect on the part of a president of Russia, Putin or anyone else, to say that he might be being diddled again, that he can't trust the president of the United States to get his act together with respect to his advisors? And, this is not a secondary issue. Actually, it's been called a secondary issue, but it's the strategic issue that worries Putin the most. He said that in very declarative terms. He said, look, you put those ABM sites in or circling us, and we know what they are. They're not ABM sites against Iran, like you say. They can be converted into offensive strike missiles. Here, Biden promises not to do that in Ukraine, and all of a sudden, that evaporates into thin air. Now, I haven't had a chance to talk to Scott about this, and I'm wondering if he has noticed the same thing, and if so, whether he places the same emphasis on its importance as I do.
Scott, your thoughts on Ray's question?
Well, look, I'm not going to ever challenge Ray's ability to carry out, open source analysis of the press. He's a master of the art. And I will also never question the ability of the United States to say one thing and do another when it comes to national security. We are the ultimate liars. We've lied to everybody. We don't know how to tell the truth when it comes to national security. And it's clear that the United States views, look, we withdrew from the INF Treaty for a reason. All right. It's not, this wasn't an accident. And people say, well, that was Trump. No, Obama wanted to withdraw from the INF Treaty. The military's always wanted the United States to withdraw from the INF Treaty. We withdrew from the INF Treaty for a reason. And the reason is we believed that it was in our national security interest, not Europe's, not Poland's, not Romania's, our national security interest, to be able to employ intermediate range missiles, conventional and potentially nuclear, on European soil in a way that threatened Russian security. We had seen a situation where Russia had developed a sense of immunity, I would say, from American first strike. Russia has a lot of things to worry about. We've been sailing destroyers up through the northern straits, and everybody's like, well, that's no big deal. That's just freedom of navigation. Well, except that when the destroyers are equipped with cruise missiles, nuclear capable cruise missiles, which if launched from that location can hit Russian missile silos very quickly. Russia says, well, wait a minute, that gives you the potential for a decapitating first strike. And so Russia realigns its forces, maybe deploys some Sarmat missiles or potential Sarmat missiles out of the immediate strike range. But now we're deploying intermediate range missiles into Europe that can strike these capabilities. The bottom line is we're hazarding, we're penetrating, we're bursting Russia's nuclear deterrent bubble. And that's what our goal has been all along. I mean, we have insane people who operate our strategic forces and who come up with strategic, rather than figuring out how to reduce the threat of nuclear war. These idiots are actually thinking that they can configure a force structure in a manner that will enable us to win a nuclear war. And so did Biden get ahead of his, it's happened before. I mean, Reykjavik, 1986, Ronald Reagan had an epiphany when he got shot. He was laying in bed and he watched an ABC series called The Day After. And he went, oh, good Lord, how realistic is this? And he talked to his scientific advisors and they said, it actually made it look pretty cool as opposed to what it would really be like. He said, but that was pretty terrible. And he said, yeah, no, nuclear war will be about the worst thing you can imagine. And then he was briefed on Able Archer 83, which was a NATO U.S. exercise of nuclear launch capability. And he found out that the Russians didn't know it was an exercise. They actually thought it might be the real deal, and that Russia mobilized and put on high alert its nuclear forces. And Reagan went, oh my God, are we this stupid? This is Ronald Reagan, arch conservative, evil empire. And he went, this is ridiculous. He sat down with Gorbachev and outside of his advisors, Richard Pearl and company, and he said, hey, Gorby, why don't we just get rid of them all? Why don't we just get rid of them all? And Gorby went, great idea, except you got this thing called SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative. If you guys would drop SDI, we'll get rid of all nukes. And they were that close. Unfortunately, Reagan was married to SDI. Gorbachev hadn't quite been advised by his people that SDI would never, ever, ever, ever work under any circumstances, that the Russians should just let the United States bankrupt itself. But the point is, we were that close to doing something because Reagan got ahead of his people. I'm not saying Joe Biden is Ronald Reagan. I'm not saying he has vision. I'm saying that Joe Biden may have honestly believed something, because as soon as Reagan came back and briefed his people, hey, guess what I just did? They freaked out. They literally flipped and they started pushing back. You found out how little control the President of the United States has over actual national security policy. All of his advisors screamed, moved around, maneuvered, whispered, boom, boom. Next thing he found out is he wasn't able to do it. He was barely able to get the INF Treaty off the ground. And that only then because Richard Pearl and other people resigned in protest. So my point is, Joe Biden could very well have, in good faith, told Putin, "Yeah, we're not going to do this." Meanwhile, the warmongers back there are sitting there going, "No, no, dude, we've just spent literally billions of dollars building up a weapons capability. We pulled out of a damn treaty, and we got all the chess pieces moving so that we can do exactly what you said we're not going to do." And yeah, so I think Ray's on to something. I don't trust anybody in the United States establishment who deals with nuclear force structure and things of this nature, because I used to believe, back when I was a junior member of that team, that we actually wanted to get rid of these weapons, that our goal was to create a framework of stability that would enable us to back away from the abyss. I'm now convinced that all of the people of my mindset and Ray's mindset and others have been retired or pushed out of the way, and there's a new generation of warmongers. Literally, there's nothing else to say. These are people who worship the concept of nuclear, not just deterrence, because deterrence means we're going to prevent anybody from ever using the nuclear dominance. And the United States seeks to be a nuclear dominant power in the world today. And the more we lose our conventional capabilities, the more the world realizes just how dysfunctional we are from a conventional standpoint, the more these generals and admirals say the only thing we have left that gives us dominance is nuclear weapons capability. So let's play our strong card. This is an empire going down, but we still have the ability to destroy the world. And the people who believe in sustaining this empire are starting to say the only way we can do this is by not only having a credible nuclear capability, but one that we're willing and able to use.
Ray Mcgovern, I got an important question for you. First, I want to remind our people, everybody here, we've got my gosh, 650 viewers right now. I'm also on Rockfin. We've got this is very important. We've got a disinformation governance board going on right now. So we never know when people like Garland and Ray and Scott will be thrown off of any particular platform, including YouTube. So I would ask everyone also to go to my Rockfin page. I put the link in the chat. So please click on that, go to my Rockfin page, become a member of Rockfin. As I said, we never know when Scott's already been tossed off of Twitter, and we never know when the three of us will be off YouTube or wherever, but Rockfin is a good alternative. Also, we do have the opportunity here to do on Rockfin. You can do the tip jar here. You can do super chats, things of that nature, which allows me to help get this thing going and get my website going. All right, Ray, this is important. Ray,
Roland,
go ahead. You had something.
Can I interrupt? I'd like to comment
sure.
on what Scott just said.
Certainly.
Yeah, I know this from being on duty with the CIA and heading up the Soviet Foreign Policy Branch. We worked to conclude the first major treaty on arms control, which was the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. Many of your viewers are probably too young to realize the significance of that. But up until then, there was this balance of terror where there was sort of the notion that one side could get predominance over the other side to the point of making a first strike with nuclear weapons, and then escape any retaliation. This was sort of a pipe dream, but it was worrying, because if one side believed that, they might try it, okay? So we worked damn hard in the early 70s, 70, 71 in Helsinki and in Vienna with the Strategic Arms Limitation Team, the negotiators, and in May of 72, and I have the privilege of being there in Moscow, the Abm Treaty was signed. And what did it do? It limited each side to, well, initially 2 ABM sites, hardly enough to defend against a first strike, against hardly enough to have a credible deterrent, okay? And then we reduced it after 2 years to 1. Did the Russians cheat? Well, Reagan asked us, not Reagan, but Nixon. In this case, he said Nixon. Nixon says, "How will the Russians cheat?" We said, well, probably. He said, well, how soon can you find out? We said, probably, well, we asked the experts, the satellite managers and all that kind of stuff, the people who know the resolution of the images, and they said, we can tell you in a week. And so we told the president, Nixon, and Kissinger, and we said, well, we can tell you in a week. He said, that's good enough. Did the Russians cheat? Yes, the Russians cheated. What did they do? They put this monster ABM site out in the Krasnoyarsk, way the hell out in Siberia, okay? It stood alone. It was clearly what it was designed for. And what did Reagan do? He didn't threaten the Russians. He said, look, we detected this. Here are the images. We need to talk. So they did talk. That's the way we used to do things in those days, right? Okay. And finally, the Russians said, okay, all right, it's an ABM site, we'll destroy it. And they destroyed it. So trust but verify, doveraj, no proveraj. Well, that started with Nixon, okay? And the short answer here is that regime, that balance of terror that was real and really was kind of a deterrent to both sides, existed for 30 years, count it, 30 years, from 72 until 2002, when Richard Pearl and John Bolton and the rest of Cheney and Bush's advisors said, well, let's ditch that treaty. Well, okay, now this is equally important. The Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty that was signed in 87, right, Scott? Yeah, 87. Okay, I was there for that too. Now, what happened? I mean, it wasn't like forbidding the emplacement of nuclear capable missiles. They were already there. They were in place, right? The Pershing IIs were in Europe, and the SS-20s were all over Europe and Asia as well. Now, Scott wrote the book about this, literally. He was an INF inspector. What happened? Well, the two sides were smart enough to say, we used to have this balance of terror where we had a deterrent under the ABM Treaty. Now it's even worse. Then we had 35 minutes of warning. Now we got 6 to 9 minutes with these INF, with these missiles, right? The SS-20s and the Pershings. That makes no sense at all. We need more time, more warning from launch to impact time. So let's destroy a whole class of intermediate range nuclear missiles. Right. McGovern says, all right, that's not going to go anywhere. Guess what? They did it. Reagan and Bush did it. Now, what's my point? Well, my point is that the warning time went back up from 6 to 9 minutes to 30 minutes or so. And now Trump, in his wisdom, and Obama before him, in deference to the U.S. military, who can only be described as crazy as Scott has, I said, no, let's make it so that we can put these intermediate range nuclear missiles in Poland, Romania, and maybe Ukraine. That was my point about this earlier stuff. Now, but I hope you don't mind me mentioning this, Scott, but Scott has written a book, a real book of his experience watching the destruction of these SS-20s in then the Soviet Union, and his experience and what this meant, how the warning time was broadened again. Now, what is it down to? Well, if you include Finland, and Scott is right, what is it, about 3 minutes warning time? Now, yeah. What's Putin going to do? He's going to automate his response system. We're all going to be fried as soon as somebody detects some kind of missile, whether it's a scientific research missile from Norway or whatever. We're all going to be dead. Okay, that's how stupid this whole thing is, and it's not illusory. It's not that we're warning about something that shouldn't be taken seriously. It should be. And what really bothers me, what I'll say lastly, is that our national intelligence directors pretty nonchalant about it. They say, well, yeah, Putin's up against the wall. If Putin considers himself under an existential threat, well, then he might consider using nuclear weapons. And if he starts to losing Ukraine, that would be a factor that would be, well, what's the conclusion to that? He's got to lose in Ukraine. He can't win in Ukraine. And then we're all fried. So, this is Saturday morning. But who wants to be fried? And I'll let it go at that.
Scott, that's actually the perfect segue for what I was going to say next. A couple of things going on. I'm going to put it together. This is all going to make sense. Number one, Finland and Sweden say, we want into NATO. A lot of background on that. Now we hear Turkey saying, there are no circumstances in which we're going to vote for that. And they have to have, we don't know yet, but they do have to have, they do have to have unanimity in order to get that done. I read an article today in RT that says, Andrei Sushensov, he says, Ukraine could just be the starting point of a bigger crisis. And here's what I think, Scott. I'm going to sum this all up. In December, the Russians sent a written demand, set of written demands to the U.S., to NATO, the U.S. And Ukraine wasn't all of it. It was, we want you to back up to back where you were before like 96. We want these missile launchers gone. They didn't just say, we want Ukraine. Is it possible that Russia's doing a special military operation in Ukraine? And after that's over, they say, now let's revisit those demands. We told you to get the hell off of our border. Are you ready to talk now? Or does this special military operation expand? I mean, has Russia just decided, look, this game of building up to our border, either we're going to fight you off or you're going to get off. That's not going to continue. That may be a little more I may be adding more, but put it all together, Scott, with your expertise and make some sense of it.
Well, I mean, we know that Russia submitted on December 17th of last year 2 draft treaties, one to the United States, one to NATO. And there's similarities in both, namely that Russia said, we, in addition to our demands on Ukraine, which is basically hinged around the issue of permanent neutrality, that Ukraine can never join NATO, and Russia rejected the idea of the eastward expansion of NATO up to its borders. They said we have to come up with a new framework for security in Europe. That the current situation that exists is unacceptable, unsustainable. That we can't have the expanded NATO starting to absorb non-national military capacity. What that means is Poland has its own army. Russia's never objected to Poland having its own army. What Russia objects to is that Poland's soil is used, for instance, for an American ABM site / offensive ballistic missile site. That American, there's now an American corps structure, headquarters, 5th Corps, I believe it is, in Poland. We've built a base where we have the permanent pre-positioned stocks for a heavy armored brigade in Poland. We are looking to perhaps put more heavy armored brigades in Poland. From a Russian perspective, this is a non-starter. It's just literally they can't allow this. It's an existential threat to Russia. The same thing with the deployment of NATO battle groups to the Baltics. I mean, the absurdity of a German reinforced armored battle group deploying to Lithuania. I mean, anybody who has an appreciation of history should just say, what? No, that can't happen. It happened. The Brits have a group there, the French, others rotate in. Romania, we have a permanent capability in Romania. We're making a U.S. naval presence in the Black Sea de facto permanent. We're flying our B-52 nuclear capable bombers on offensive flight profiles right up to the Russian border, then veering away. The Russians have taken a look at all of this and said, no, it's not going to happen. So the Russian policy is rollback. Now, they wanted to do it through negotiation. And the best way for them to start a negotiation would be to make sure that they have a buffer of neutrality that separates them from NATO. Ukraine was an important element of that. Belarus is supposed to be an element of that. Finland is supposed to be an important element of that. But the point is, some people say, well, the Russians have a history, and Ray knows this, of putting all sides do extreme positions forward, negotiate backwards to a common ground. That may have applied in the Soviet Union times when the United States and the Soviet Union viewed each other as equals. But Russia has been coming at this problem from a position of weakness for 2 decades. When Vladimir Putin started putting his marker down saying, I'm a little concerned about what you're doing, we ignored him because he's Russia. Russia's weak. We don't have to pay attention. So Putin gradually built up Russia's strength, but he's still putting his position in, and the U.S. refuses to negotiate. What happened in December is Russia's back is literally up against a wall. There's no more negotiation. There's no backwards. There's nowhere Russia can go. Russia's against the wall, and Russia said, this is the position. This is what must happen, not what we want to happen, what we're willing to negotiate backward from. There will be a redefining of European security framework that has NATO retreating to its pre-1997 borders. That doesn't mean that Poland stops being a member of NATO. It means that Poland can no longer host any non-Polish NATO military capability. The same thing with the Baltics. This is a demand from Russia, not a request, a demand. And we need to understand that no matter what happens in Ukraine, that demand still exists. Now, Russia, they're very reticent. You don't hear the Russians broadcasting, their strategy and their objectives and stuff. You just have to take what they say at face value. I think Russia believes that the combined impact of a Russian military victory in Ukraine with the devastating economic consequences of NATO and Europe trying to stand up to Russia through sanctions, and the immense expense that will come with trying to retool NATO, because NATO is a joke. Literally, it is a joke of an organization. The British saying that they want to provide military security guarantees. Britain can't deploy anything, anywhere, anytime. That's it. They're a joke. We can go on. The Germans had to basically cannibalize the totality of their armored force to get that armored unit up to Lithuania. The idea that Germany now can deploy troops into Poland, even if history would allow that to happen, there's nobody Germany can deploy. They have nothing. The Romanians have nothing. The Polish army is a joke. If they tried to have a massive exercise today, a mobilization, 60% of the Polish military would be in the barracks because none of their stuff works. That's why they're in the process of swapping old stuff out to get new stuff. This whole Ukraine thing is one big arms exchange, scam. But my point is, Russia is hoping that the expense of trying to stand up to Russia would be too much for Europe. Now, is Russia right on this? I don't know. It's hard to predict the future. If the West senses weakness on the part of Russia, if the West senses that while Russia could seize the eastern part of Ukraine but not finish the job, that might bring some resolution to this. Turkey, everybody's applauding Turkey, but Turkey didn't oppose Finland joining because that is a suicide pill for NATO. It is. That's not why Turkey said no. Turkey said no because the Scandinavians provide safe haven and succor to the PKK, to the Kurdish groups. And they say, you guys support terrorists. We're not going to allow a repeat of the Greece situation where Turkey said Greece can rejoin NATO, and then Greece turned around to stab Turkey in the back, according to the Turks. So the Turks aren't willing to allow that to happen, but it has nothing to do with the security threat posed by Finland joining NATO. The same thing with Slovakia's objections. It's not that, oh my God, we would never let Finland join because this would be the end of us all. It's, no, we're pissed off at them. Excuse my language. We're irritated with them. about, their policies toward Croatia and things of that nature. These are things that the United States and others can seek to paper over with incentives, bribery, cajoling, threats, etc. The point I bring up is that Finland's still a big problem, and Russia's not backing down, and they will not allow Finland to join NATO. That's my firm belief. They will not allow this to happen. And that means that Russia will destroy Finland as a modern nation state before they allow Finland to join NATO. Sweden, I think Sweden would pay a price, but Finland is on the chopping block. Their head is there, and there's nothing that can save Finland. And that's the point I tried to make with Ukraine. There's nothing that can save Ukraine. Ukraine is gone because Russia eventually is going to transition away from a special military operation to a war, and they are going to eliminate the Western Ukrainian safe haven. They're going to destroy Kiev as a political center of gravity, and they're going to do the same thing to Finland. And NATO can do nothing to stop them because NATO has nothing to stop them except nuclear weapons, and Russia has its own nuclear capability. But this is a very dangerous situation because the more Russia acts out in this matter, the more difficult it is for NATO, because you have a lot of people saying, "Oh, we can't push Putin into a corner. Remember, we got to give Putin an off-ramp." That the opposite's true too. You can't push NATO into a corner. You can't push the United States into a corner. There's got to be an off-ramp. And I can't imagine a scenario that has NATO saying, "Yeah, well, we'll allow this new European security framework after Russia destroys both Ukraine and Finland." I can't imagine a scenario when NATO is going to go, "Yeah, now we want to back down. Now we want to be." No, I think it's going to double the resolve, and it's going to end up with a war in Poland, because Poland's just an insane nation. That in the Baltics, these are crazy nations that's never been allowed into NATO. They view NATO as the shield and the sword that they can employ against the threat. They have centuries worth of grievances building up, and I see nothing but trouble, danger looming. I don't see a negotiated settlement here. I don't, and I don't know if Russia's strong enough to win against everybody. Russia's strong. Russia has capability. But the idea that Russia, even under general mobilization, would be able to successfully push back against a resolute NATO that itself mobilizes is might be wishful thinking on the part of the Kremlin. So we're heading in a direction where neither side will back down, and neither side is being afforded a diplomatic off-ramp, and that just spells trouble for everybody.
Ray, let me go to you. There's plenty to talk about, Ray, but you got. I think there's something I'd like you to add to this. Russia can't lose this. If you study Russian culture and you see what's going on with them, you understand that Russia sees Hitler, they see Napoleon, and they see this as another great patriotic moment. But they got a big brother who sees the same, and that's China. And so we're talking about, that's unfortunately World War III, but we're talking about China saying, we cannot allow Russia to lose. It's an existential threat, because if Russia loses, it strengthens the EU. The US says to the EU, come on, let's go get China. And this thing goes really bad. So China, I see China doing everything up to and including military action. They see this as an existential threat also. At any rate, let's put all of this together. Ray Mcgovern, make some sense of it.
Well, as you know, Garland, Scott knows, I've been stressing the Chinese aspect of this for half a year now, since it became clear that Putin was given to understand by Joe Biden that Biden had been advised that China and Russia were at loggerheads. As Biden said explicitly, China is squeezing Russia. It's got a long border, and it's got pretensions to be a major military outfit there in Asia, and it's squeezing Russia. Russia's got this big problem, okay? Well, the rest of last year, that is after the June 16th summit between Putin and Biden, the Chinese and the Russians made it quite clear that not only is China not squeezing Russia, but it has sort of like a fraternal embrace around Russia, and that they have what's tantamount to to a military alliance. Now, why is this important? Well, let's go back to the strategic situation here. And March 1st, 2018, when Putin got up and he said, look, I'm up to here with the West not listening to me. I am about to show you videos of 5 new weapon systems that the West cannot defend against. They're hypersonic, many of them. Some of them go around the South Pole. They're not going to be able to build ABMs around the South Pole. This is what they are. And he showed them. And then he said, now, will you listen? And the West didn't listen. So what built up 4 years later, or 3 years later in 2021, was not only these strategic missiles, and not only the intermediate missiles that Scott and I have been discussing already in Romania, or potentially in Romania, Poland, and perhaps even Ukraine, but the strategic situation had changed. Still, would Putin have invaded Ukraine all by his lonesome, all by himself, as my grandchildren say? No way would he. He has China at his back. China has made it very clear that it supports Russian objectives toward NATO, and partly for the reasons you mentioned, Garland. They realize they're the next target, for God's sake. And if NATO succeeds in defeating Putin or driving him into a corner, China is next. I mean, they don't have to be paranoid about that. They read the US Pentagon documents. China is enemy number 1. Russia doesn't make it to the first tier, for God's sake. They're number 4, I think, okay? And it's just a month ago. So my point is simply this, that Putin went into Ukraine with tacit understanding from President Xi of China. That is big. That changed the whole equation. Not only the strategic and tactical military equation, but when Putin says that he went in for two express purposes, denazification and demilitarization, he is capable of achieving those. What happened? He's going to probably next couple of weeks. But what happens after that? That's what Scott rightly points out is a real problem. Last thing I'll question is this. A couple of weeks ago, we were talking and we said, well, you know, when NATO puts in those new 155 howitzers, they got to move by train. They're going to be detected. Russia's going to blow the hell out of all the new equipment that comes into Ukraine. Since then, they've hit many railheads. They're hitting many dumps and ammo dumps and so forth. Well, what do we think now? I mean, it's billions and billions, but if they can't get in without being destroyed, what does that do to the equation? I don't know. Scott, do you have any ideas on that?
Well, the thing that frustrates me, not because I'm pro-Russian or whatever, it's that, you know, my assessment was that it would be very difficult for Ukraine to absorb this equipment, this material. The 155 howitzers are already operating against Russia. I mean, they're in Ukraine. They're operating. They're having effect in the Kharkov region. Not all 90 of them, but they have several batteries worth in play. How did this happen? And this is one of the reasons why I've radically changed my my overall assessment, because I had been operating under the assumption that Russia would be able to interdict the vast majority of this equipment. Russia has shown itself unable or unwilling to do this. And as a result, the Ukrainians are having meaningful impact on the battlefield, not in the areas of main contention in the Donbass, but on the periphery. For instance, this is one of the reasons why Russia has carried out tactical withdrawals north of Kharkov, because in order to match, Ukraine's putting its best capabilities there. In order to match that best capability, Russia would have to divert resources from its main effort. Russia has opted not to do so, so they're trading, land, redefining the battlefield, realigning it, using natural terrain features such as rivers to block the Ukrainians. But this is a transformative moment in the war, because what it means is that demilitarization is not taking place. That for all the forces that Russia's destroying in the east, Ukraine is rebuilding significant capability. And I liken this to Moscow in October, November, December of 1941, where the Germans are driving, they're moving towards Moscow, and the Russians just start throwing things at them, sacrificing everything to slow the Germans down until General Winter and the combination of Siberian divisions came in that gave them the ability to counterattack. The Germans were bled white, and they were stopped and pushed back. If Russia doesn't change the calculation that's going on right now, that is the trajectory we're heading on. Because 200,000 troops, no matter how good they are and well equipped they are only capable of doing so much. And the fighting that's taking place right now, even though it's slaughtering Ukrainians, it ain't cost free to the Russians. They're losing equipment. They're losing men. They're losing materiel. And unless Putin mobilizes or transfers forces in, those aren't being replaced. So instead of having 200,000 men online, Russia today might have 180,000. And if you don't think removing 20,000 people from that equation changes the options available to the Russian leadership, you don't know anything about war. So I believe Russia is going to win in the East. I believe they're grinding the Ukrainians down as we speak. They're slaughtering them. It's the amount of death and destruction being dealt to the Ukrainians is unimaginable. But I believe the Ukrainians are willing to take these losses in order to buy time so that they can reconstitute a military that will challenge Russia. Because unless Russia is willing to jump across the Dnieper River and head into central Ukraine and western Ukraine and eliminate the strategic depth that the Ukrainians are being gifted by the Russians, demilitarization is not taking place. It can't take place when tens of billions of dollars of equipment is pouring in and Russia is not able to interdict it. You know, the fact that these 155 millimeter M777 howitzers are operating on the front lines right now shows that there's something wrong with the Russian methodology. And unless they alter that methodology, I think that we're in for a very long summer.
So I would think that generals in Moscow are arguing with Putin. Look, we have to change our methodology. We have to change our approach. Either we cut our losses, or we go for the whole 9 yards, and we start bombing the hell out of Western Ukraine. It's still not a member of NATO. They're still going to be shy about matching us in any meaningful way. Let's blow the hell out of them. Now, I don't know if that's really an option, but it probably would come only if there were a full mobilization in Russia. Is that your judgment, Scott? I think I've heard you say that before.
Yeah, Russia did a partial mobilization a little while ago, 60,000 troops. And I believe that provided them the strategic depth to enable them, once the East is taken, to take Odessa. Because I think that's still part of the Russian objective. I think you're the expert at reading the Russian press, but the discussion that's going on right now is about the dysfunction. I think Garland, you mentioned an article by a Russian analyst from the Valdai group, but he's talking about how Ukraine, basically is a dysfunctional nation state, and how it was always difficult to marry the West Ukraine nationalists with the East Ukraine Russians. That was always a difficult proposition. It's now there's no reasonable person can think of a way to keep them married. This is a divorce that is going to happen. The Russian speakers will never be part of Ukraine. Ukraine will never accept Russian speakers, and the Russian speakers will never be able to live in peace with the nationalists. So I think that Russia is seeking to break away the Russian-speaking effort. I think that's the objective of the special military operation. I believe they have sufficient forces to do this. But I also believe that Russia believed that Ukraine would be defeated when this phase of the operation was complete, that it would be a belly up, surrender, we're going to negotiate, whatever. I think that aspect has changed. I think they let Zelensky live too long. They allowed him too much time to build relationships with the West. They allowed the West time to overcome internal domestic political obstacles about providing heavy weaponry, and they've allowed NATO to reconstitute the supply mechanism. Ukraine has strategic depth right now that it did not enjoy when this conflict started, and this changes everything. And if Russia doesn't adapt to that, and it requires more than mobilizing 60,000, it's going to require mobilizing 1.5 million people, because once Russia engages decisively on Ukraine, it's going to have to be willing to engage decisively on Finland, because what's motivating the Finns and the Swedes to join isn't Russia's pacifism; it's Russia's militancy. Russia's actions in Ukraine is what pushed Finland and Sweden over the what had been a political red line. And if Russia doubles down on Ukraine, Finland and Sweden are going to double down on joining NATO. It may take some time to overcome Turkish and Slovakian objections, but eventually the United States will bribe them. That's what we do best. We twist arms, we bribe, we cajole, and they will get a unanimous vote out of NATO. And Russia, it is a strategic defeat for Russia if Finland joins NATO. Once Finland joins NATO, they have Article 5 protection. That changes everything. That means now Russia would have to go. So I believe Russia would have to take out Finland prior to it receiving Article 5 protection, which means general mobilization. So for the Russians, it's a matter of mobilize now or mobilize later, but you're going to have to mobilize no matter what. And the sooner you mobilize, the sooner you can resolve what's becoming a very, very difficult problem in Ukraine. The strategic situation in Ukraine today is far different than it existed when Russia conceived the special military operation.
There's one
with respect to Finland, the NATO meeting at which this will be decided, ironically enough, in Warsaw, like the first, was it Warsaw?
Madrid.
No, it's in Madrid, where the first expansion of NATO was approved.
Yep.
So we have Madrid again. It's the 29th and 30th of next month, June. So is this something we should really be keeping in mind? In other words, if Finland and Sweden decide to do this kind of thing, will it be approved at the end of June? And so, as night follows the day, the Russians will have to do something to dissuade the Finns in the first instance before the end of June. I throw that out as a question. I would also add this, that Garland and Scott, you mentioned the Nazis, the Nazi invasion in 1941 of Russia through Ukraine. You mentioned Napoleon, right? What people don't usually mention is that the Russians suffered invasions from the Swedes, from the Lithuanians, from the Hanseatic League, the Germans up there in North Baltic. This is part of Russian history. Every Russian student knows this. So this is sort of like a really bad flashback. What you have here is what Peter the Great wanted to make not happen by beating a window into West. And Pushkin had that great poem, "Nud grazit my budem Shvedu." From here, Leningrad, Petersburg, we're going to grazit Ivan Grozny. We're going to threaten Shvedu, the Swedes. Здесь будет город заложен. Here there's going to be a city established. На змей, на медную соседу, природа здесь нам суждено в Европу прорубить окно. Okay, here nature itself has foreordained that we're going to break through a window into Europe. Now, this is the galactic change. The Russians have given up on that. And not anytime soon are they going to break a real decent window into Western Europe. And they've turned around. And luckily for them, Comrade Z finds himself in the same strategic situation, the same strategic threat, except he's number one. And so this is the new reality. This is why Putin can move, if he mobilizes, with a certain degree of assurance that Z has his back.
Which brings me, guys, I know we're supposed to do an hour, but I got one more question, if you don't mind. If you got a couple more minutes, we got to touch on China. Scott, recently there was an election in the Philippines. Ferdinand Marcos Jr., a guy who is, let's face it, he ain't exactly the latest iteration of Gandhi by any stretch of the imagination. However, for a number of historical reasons, he's going to lean more towards reconciliation with China than would his opponent. That's certainly a problem. That's not a problem. To me, it's a good thing in that it's going to stop the neocons kind of in their tracks from utilizing Philippines. We also see that the Solomon Islands, they're also saying, nah, we're going to kind of lean towards China. What we're seeing is wherein the U.S. empire is able to get a bunch of compliant vassal states in the European area to all join and say, yes, we'll host missiles, we'll take suicide pills, economic suicide pills, whatever you need to help to poke the eye of the bear. In the Asian region, they're not having that kind of success. And China seems stronger as far as allies. China's going to people saying, hey, here's $20-30 billion. And these countries are saying, hey, we're good. We can go with that. We're seeing what happens to Ukraine. We don't want to get turned into Ukraine. Plus, we'll take the money. Your thoughts on what's happening in the Asian region, Philippines, Solomon Islands, etc. Scott Ritter.
Well, to understand all that, you have to understand China's strategic posturing. They have something they call the 9-dash line. Basically, it's an old Chinese map that outlines China's territorial reach based upon the continental shelf extension off of the Chinese continent into the Pacific. The 9-dash line takes them well into the South Pacific Sea, and they've solidified their position there by building these enhanced man-made islands that they've now fortified. And for a long time, the position of the United States was, and its allies in the region, was to push back, to roll back the Chinese, to make these islands, the Chinese posture on these islands, untenable. That has failed. China has completed the fortification of these islands. If anything, one of the many lessons of the Ukraine conflict is that big ships that get too close to shores that contain anti-ship missiles tend to sink, even if they're called Moskva. And the fact of the matter is, China has stocked these islands with area denial capability that eliminates any naval advantage the United States might have had. So the United States has been looking for a way to contain the new Chinese reality. And that's where the Solomon Islands comes in. That's where the Philippines comes in, because the United States needs the Philippines, needs the Solomon Islands, needs other areas to create this fourth wall around China. China's penetrated that. They penetrated it by negotiating a deal with the Solomon Islands that has just blown America's mind, because the Marine Corps. We have this new missile that the Army's building, this missile called the Dark Eagle hypersonic missile. It's supposed to be deployed. They're talking about this summer. It may be delayed next summer because we can't build weapons that work. But the idea was that we would fly these missiles into Australia, operating in northern Australia off of unimproved airstrips, and then deploy with a C-130 into other unimproved areas like on the Solomon Islands, where we could land, cart them off, load them up, fire a bunch of missiles, load them back on, fly away before the Chinese even knew what hit them. Except the Solomon Islands ain't playing that game anymore. They're on the other side. And all our strategic thinkers are going, wait, the Chinese just destroyed all the chess pieces we've been carving. The chessboard's changed. The Philippines, yes, we have major military training exercises with the Philippines, but Marcos Jr., just a little piece of history. In 1986, I deployed to the Philippines as part of an emergency force when the original Papa Marcos went down, and we were worried that the new People's Army, communists, were going to take over. So I got a little bit of history in the Philippines. But Marcos Jr. has said, hey, you remember in 2016, we all went to Helsinki, to the International Court, and we said, China, what you're doing with the 9-dash line, this is illegal, against international law. And we got the court to agree with us. Well, he says, yeah, I'm going to set that one aside. I'm just done. We're not going to play that diplomatic game with China anymore. I think it's important that we recognize reality and we have good relations. The point is that U.S. policy is in a flux. The Chinese know exactly what they want to do. I always bring this up. I'll bring it up again. John Boyd's OODA loop. Get inside the enemy's decision-making cycle, observe, orient, decide, act. The side that's inside the decision-making cycle of the other tends to win 100% of the time. China's inside our decision-making cycle. They've penetrated it. They're flipping around. We are reacting to them, and we will never catch up. And while this is taking place, the biggest game in town is Taiwan. And I think China has looked at Ukraine, and the big lesson they've got from Ukraine is when you decide to act decisively and win quickly. They're looking at Ukraine dragging out. That this is taking longer than anybody envisioned. Anybody. I mean, I wasn't General Miley saying 5 days, but there's no way I thought this thing was stretching into month 3 and still unresolved. And China's looking at and recognizing, because what's happening is the greatest fear. I've always said, time is not the friend of Russia or China. That if you create a situation that is a game changer, then change the game and win the game. Because if you change the game and fail to win the game, the other side has tremendous capabilities that take time to mobilize, but once they mobilize, given the alliance structure, become real capabilities. And and Russia's finding that out right now in Europe. China, I think the lesson learned from this is, one, avoid war with over Taiwan at all costs, meaning that the push diplomacy, push a diplomatic off-ramp, push patience. I attended a conference just a little while ago where a strategic Chinese thinker, senior, basically said we can't go to war with Taiwan because everything we seek to accomplish by bringing Taiwan into our fold will be destroyed. We need a functioning Taiwan. We need Taiwan to be viable. We need Taiwan to have people, the economy, et cetera. And a war would destroy all that. So we'd be cutting ourselves in the throat by invading Taiwan. The only reason why we would go into Taiwan is if Taiwan declared independence, or if other nations started treating Taiwan like an independent state. The danger is that the United States is starting to treat Taiwan like an independent state. And Taiwan's starting to talk the language of independence. So we are teetering towards a conflict that China does not want to fight. But remember this, we're incapable of fighting it. Unlike Ukraine, we have no ability to reinforce Taiwan. There is no military relationship. We have no pre-deployed forces. Thousands of miles of Pacific Ocean separate the United States from Taiwan, and we would lose every ship we sought to send to Taiwan to reinforce Taiwan. So China knows this, and I believe that China, the lesson they got from Ukraine is delay war forever if possible. That war is not the solution. And nobody looking at Ukraine thinks that this is a good situation for anybody involved. It's a disaster for everybody. Because even if Russia wins the war, what's the peace going to look like? I mean, so Taiwan's looking at that saying, man, decisive military action may not be as decisive as you think it's going to be. That, you can't predict the outcome. So we're not going to move decisively on Taiwan. China's actually pretty happy with the situation that exists right now. they're slowly but surely gaining economic control over Taiwan through these economic relationships, etc. So Taiwan, I think, would allow the current situation to extend in perpetuity as long as Taiwan doesn't formally declare independence. The danger comes if Taiwan says, "Yeah, we want to be independent. We're gonna buy off on this American notion of freeing ourselves." Because when that happens, I think the other lesson Taiwan got or China got is when you act decisively, terminate this thing instantly. And I think that Taiwan will find out that there will never be independence. All there will be is one form of Chinese control over another. You can either work with the Chinese right now and have a wonderfully functioning nation, or all that will end. But either way, you're going to be under China. China doesn't want war, but if they're going to fight a war, they're going to win the war that quick. That's my thing.
Ray, let me add one more thing to that, and that is, in the event that there were problems in with their partner, the partner of their strategic alliance in Europe, Russia was having some issues. Is it possible that the Chinese could say, we're going to stir up some trouble in the Taiwanese Strait, we're going to stir up some problems there to broaden the concerns of the U.S. empire? You know, if they see, because in reality, the war in Ukraine, China does see that as their war also. Is it possible that that's another possibility, even if, let's say, they're going to or not going to attack Taiwan, but they see Russia having problems and the U.S. focusing on that, that they just say, hey, you know what? We're going to give you some headaches over here, and we're going to make you look in another direction and see if you have the resources and wherewithal to go in two directions at the same time. I'm just throwing that out there, but your thoughts on all of this, Ray McGovern?
Well, Garland, I believe you're right. And I've been saying this for a year now, long before it became a situation where both the Chinese and the Russians described their alliance as having no limits, as being closer in effectiveness than a traditional alliance. That's where they are now. Now, did Xi openly or tacitly bless the invasion of Ukraine? Everything I've seen so far since the invasion of Ukraine, in terms of China's reaction, persuades me that Putin would never have gone ahead had he not gotten at least tacit acquiescence from China. My Chinese analyst colleagues disagree. They say, oh no, China would never ever violate their devotion to the principles of Westphalia, non-interference in the affairs of other countries. That's their principal position. Yeah, right. In my view, they gave Putin, a waiver on that. Okay, Putin, you go ahead. Now, why? Was it because Xi loves Putin, as he says he's his best friend? No, was it that? The Chinese are on the top of the list for the next target of U.S., NATO, even NATO. The Atlantic Security Treaty, talking about being involved in China in East Asia for 2 years now. Okay, what does that mean? Well, you don't have to be paranoid to be concerned if you're a Chinese person, if you're the Chinese president. So, in answer to your question, yes, I think before actually Putin did something really, really dramatic, like dropping a little nuclear capable missile in the middle of Finland, not killing anybody, but showing how quickly that missile could get there and how it is nuclear capable. Before he even did that, I think he would say, hey, President Xi, it's not going as well as I thought it was. Why don't you stir up a little anxiety on the part of the U.S. out there in East Asia? Why don't you rattle a few swords instead of sending 19 fighter jets over the Taiwan air interdiction zone? Why don't you double that? Why don't you get them scared? Because even these, what shall I call them? Let's just not use adjectives. Even these top U.S. military people are smart enough. No, they are smart enough to realize that they can't handle a two-front war. And that's what it would amount to. Not only a two-front war, but a two-front war with nuclear-capable adversaries. I mean, that should be in their ken, and they should be able to understand that. So at that point, I think they go to President Biden and say, Joe, let's pull back a little. This looks too dangerous, and our ships are going to be sunk if you send them out there.
Well, I want to thank you guys, and I want to thank our viewers. I really appreciate you coming on. I believe this show brings together two of the most capable experts in the world today on these issues, and these are the things that our viewers and our people really need to learn. I want to ask all of our viewers to share this on all of your platforms to promote this. People need to see this, this and get this kind of information and understanding. I also ask everyone to follow me on Rockfin. That's ROKFIN. As we know, Scary Poppins and the disinformation and the government disinformation board are out there. And to be quite frank, it's unfortunate that a lot of these types of shows are in jeopardy, in danger of being censored. So please share this. Please follow me on Rockfin, Garland Nixon on Rockfin. So I have a Patreon page, patreon.com. / Garland Nixon. I've got that up. I've got my website up, and I'm going to start sharing all of these videos, and I'm going to be putting up lots of articles and links and things of that nature. So I want to thank everyone for being a part of this. Ray, Scott, thanks a lot, and I hope I can get you guys together again sometime soon. I think this is really important work that we're doing.
Well, thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys. I'll talk to you again soon. Everyone, don't forget, share this on all of your platforms. Smash that like button. Peace. We are out.